Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. We just finished up day 3 of the NFL draft, so all 7 rounds are in the books. And in the last 2 days, I've gone through some of the winners and losers from the draft. Here for day 3, I just kind of want to highlight a few players. I think it maybe like 5, 6, 7 guys who I think are interesting options, heading into 2022 and kind of beyond. So just prospects that I think, landed in nice spots and may have an opportunity to produce pretty early on. And let's start it off with Dameon Pierce out of Florida. He was picked in the 4th round, second overall pick in that round, and he went to the Texans. I thought Texans were a team that were going to go running back, kind of early on, maybe round 2, round 3. Some teams kind of jumped ahead of them, so I wonder if, they wanted to, it just didn't work out. But they go out, they draft Dameon Pierce, and I think this is probably one of the best landing spots for a running back because that running back room is wide open right now. He's going to be competing with guys like Marlon Mack and Rex Burkhead. And even though Dameon Pierce was never a workhorse running back at Florida, he definitely excelled in a variety of different areas. I think he can step in and be an early down grinder at the NFL level. He definitely has the size for it. He can be a solid goal line option. I mean, in 2021, he only logged 100 total carries, but 13 of those were touchdowns. So very, very efficient down on the goal line. But then he also was solid in the receiving game, can definitely contribute there. Caught 19 passes for 213 yards and 3 touchdowns last season. And for fantasy football, when we're looking at running backs, volume is 100% key because you can score points just getting, a ton of inefficient touches. It's very tough to be a top contributor if you're not getting, those valuable opportunities. And I think Dameon Pierce has a solid opportunity to step in and earn touches in year 1 with the Texans. So he's an interesting guy to watch, heading into fantasy draft season. Now we're going to stay in the 4th round with this next pick of Romeo Doubs. Goes as the 427 to the Packers. As a college prospect, Romeo Doubs had really, really solid college production. He put up 1,000+ yards in the receiving game in both his junior and senior seasons. He actually had a really wild stretch to start off his 2020 season. In his first 5 games, he racked up 36 receptions for 778 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. It's just kind of a, quick little stat there. Was absolutely dominant to start off that 2020 year. And he goes to the Packers, where I talked about, I think it was in yesterday's video, that wide receiver room is pretty wide open. I talked about Allen Lazard and Christian Watson being winners, but I also think Romeo Doubs could kind of play a role here. When you're looking at that wide receiver room, you've got veterans like Randall Cobb and Sammy Watkins. Allen Lazard mentioned is in there. And then you have Christian Watson picked in the 2nd round, and then Amari Rodgers, who was a 3rd round pick last year. So who knows? Romeo Doubs could step in and end up being like the wide receiver 6 on this team. But I think it's also possible he steps in. Maybe he can be like the wide receiver 3. I think the Packers are definitely going to be spreading the ball around much more than they did last year, where they could just kind of target funnel to Devontae Adams. So just a name to watch there. Now moving over to the 5th round, actually the first pick of the 5th round. Here we have Sam Howell, goes to the Commanders. And just, as a value pick, I mean, Sam Howell, I think, is a great pick here for Washington. Personally, I'm shocked he fell this far because just looking back at last year, I mean, he was projected to be like a top 10 pick, has a little bit of a down season, with all his weapons gone and a bad offensive line, and his value just absolutely plummeted. And so, if you were talking to me a few days ago, this would just be a horrible outcome for Sam Howell because he is going so late. But now that we're looking at him here in the 5th round, I think of 5th round quarterbacks, he has very, very high potential. I think most of us would agree that Carson Wentz is not going to be the future quarterback for the Commanders. He may be it for this year, maybe next year, but I think that quarterback room is a little bit open, at least more open than a lot of the other teams in the league. So I think Howell will have the opportunity to come in, impress people internally in that organization, and that could lead to him gaining a starting job, maybe a few years out. And then just a few picks later, we had Khalil Shakir going to the Bills at the 505. And he was a wide receiver I really liked heading into the draft. I think I had him as my wide receiver 12. Definitely went much later than that. Those were fantasy rankings. But, I was surprised he actually went this late. I thought he would go probably in the first 4 rounds. And if you're a Gabriel Davis fan, I mean, this is great news for him because they did not go out and draft one of these top wide receivers. When you're looking at the Bills wide receiver room, you've got Stephon Diggs there as the clear-cut number one. No one's competing with his opportunities. And then you have Gabe Davis and Jamison Crowder kind of looking as like the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. But I think, those spots are not totally locked in. Gabriel Davis had that amazing game in the playoffs, but in terms of regular season production, he hasn't done a ton. And then I think Jamison Crowder is definitely kind of on the way down, but can still be a very productive player. So I think if Khalil Shakir comes in and impresses, I could definitely see him having a role in this offense in year one. It may not be a super fantasy relevant role, but definitely someone to keep an eye on in the next few years. And then staying in the 5th round with Tyler Allgeier, who went at the 508 to the Falcons. The Falcons were a solid landing spot for a running back. He did go later than I would have hoped, but I think, this is a nice spot to land for Tyler Allgeier. You have Cordero Patterson there, back on a 2-year contract. He's 100% going to be getting work, but he's not a workhorse running back by any means. He faded last year and was still not getting, a ton of touches on the ground. So there's an opportunity for one of these running backs to step in and get around 10 carries a game, maybe even more, get some opportunities in the receiving game. This is a team that needs weapons. They need people to get the ball to. You have Kyle Pitts, you have Drake London, you have Cordero Patterson. Other than that, they're still pretty empty there. And then you're looking at the other running backs on the roster. Mike Davis was pretty brutal last year, at least in terms of his rushing ability and just efficiency in the receiving game. And then you have Damian Williams. I would hope that Tyler Allgeier would be able to beat out both of those players. If he can't, then there's no point in having him for fantasy. But I do think he can step in as a rookie and split the load with Cordero Patterson from day one if things, kind of break right for him during the offseason. So Tyler Allgeier, someone to keep an eye on out of that Atlanta backfield. And then the final player here, kind of tough to project really positive things for these guys going in the 6th and 7th rounds. But I want to talk about Tyler Badie here at the 6-18 going to the Ravens. And you may think the Ravens kind of have their backfield on lock, but I actually think there are definitely a few question marks heading into the 2022 season. Both J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards missed the entire 2021 season. They're coming back off of ACL tears. I think it was kind of surprising when news broke that the Ravens were kind of inquiring about Melvin Gordon, thinking of bringing him in, because I felt like people kind of thought they had a solid 1-2 punch here with Dobbins and Edwards. That could mean they're potentially concerned about one of these guys, or maybe even both of them, on their returns from those ACL tears. You never know if things could go wrong. Maybe they end up missing extended time. And we know that the Ravens are one of these teams who love to consistently use 2 running backs. They're going to be splitting the carries. I didn't think J.K. Dobbins was going to step in and be the workhorse. He was probably going to be in that 12, 14 carry range. You've got Gus Edwards in that 7 to 9. So there's definitely roles here for these running backs. Badie is undersized at 5'8", 197 pounds, but he had a monster workhorse season for Missouri last year. In 12 games, he rushed for over 1,600 yards and then added 54 receptions for 330 receiving yards and then scored 18 total touchdowns. So he could be one of these late round running backs that kind of find their way into a rotation and may become, fantasy relevant in deeper leagues as soon as in 2022. So those are some guys I have my eyes on. Let me know what late round flyers you guys are going to take shots on down in the comment section. I'll make sure to respond to everyone who comments. Want to know who you guys are looking at. Thank you again for stopping by, and I'll see you guys in the next one.